These students at the University of Toronto are angry because a so-called men's rights activist was speaking at their college. His words are hate speech, they said.
No hate speech on campus!
They stopped people like this man from getting in to see the lecture.
I've never heard him before.
We invite you to educate yourself.
So I just wanted to listen to him, but now I can't get in.
The boy crisis.
The so-called men's rights advocate speaking inside was Warren Farrell.
For the first time in U.S. history, boys will have less education than their dads.
Farrell is an odd person to call anti-woman. He was actually an early feminist movement leader. Here he is with Gloria Steinem. But as he learned more, he started to disagree with parts of modern feminism.
I don't agree with the part of feminism that says men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. That part of feminism is sick.
Men are running the government, they run most companies, they make more money.
Our dads and our grandpas, they made sacrifices to make more money, and then the feminist movement turned all of that sacrifice on the part of men against men, and they haven't said, you were discriminated against men in your own way. You were obliged to earn more money, or we wouldn't even be thinking about marrying you. We wouldn't be thinking about having children with you.
In his book, The Boy Crisis, Farrell notes that both sexes struggle. Today, boys are almost a third less likely to get college degrees than girls, twice as likely to commit suicide. Why is no one talking about this?
Because we have believed for the last 50 years that men had all the privilege and men had all the power.
Men and boys started falling behind when government began subsidizing single mothers.
They tear the family apart by giving the money to mothers when fathers are absent and not giving money to mothers when fathers are present.
That policy, part of the welfare system created in the 60s, helped lead to more households without fathers. Farrell says that hurts boys most. Why are boys more affected than girls?
Boys tend to not have as many skills at developing friendships and developing emotional connections. And so when their family connection breaks apart, it affects them more profoundly than it does their sisters.
This 1989 CBS interview captured the changing attitudes after welfare programs started.
I think I can make it as a single parent.
But don't you think you might need help in raising that baby from a man?
Not really.
It doesn't make any difference whether she needs a man. It makes a difference that her children need a father.
What happens when the kids don't have fathers?
Children do worse in 70 different areas. They're far more likely to be disobedient, delinquent, drop out of school.
Fathers are critical, says Farrell, because men tend to parent differently. For example, men roughhouse more with kids. Why is that important?
Roughhousing creates so many skill sets. The father's creating a bond with the child, so the children don't mind the discipline because the discipline is the price they pay for more fun with dad.
People think that mothers tend to be better parents because on average, they're more attentive to children's needs.
Mothers are more empathetic as a rule to the children than dads, but an empathetic parent does not create an empathetic child. An empathetic parent is someone who's always thinking of the children's needs, which teach the children to always have his or her needs thought of. The empathy is created by the father or the mother requiring the child to think about the father's needs, the mother's needs, their brother's needs.
In fact, he says helping children too much is harmful. Dr. Phil covered that in this video clip.
Robbie, Mom is rewriting your essay.
Why? What is wrong with my essay?
Listen, this is the first paragraph. You wrote, have no time to eat. You need to start with...
Mom, I'm in middle school. I'm not in high school yet. You want me to try. Let me try. Don't do it for me, Mom. I really want to do it myself.
Moms are filled with love, and they want to make sure their children do well. So they often do for the children. Dads are filled with love, but the way that dads love is to feel that I need to love the children by having the children learn how to do for themselves.
Having both an involved mother and father leads to the best outcome for kids. A government summary of studies notes children who live with their fathers are more likely to have good physical and emotional health, to achieve academically, to avoid drugs, violence, and delinquent behavior.
We need men to be involved in the fathering role to a much greater degree than they are and have been. Even when we control, for the amount of money a father and mother earn. Children with dads still do much better.
Ready? Jump, jump, woo! Jump, woo!
Social Security is running out of money. But don't worry, our presidents always say they will
strengthen and save Social Security.
Safeguard Social Security.
I'll save Social Security.
Except, unfortunately, none will really save it. Here's the problem. Years ago, government made us a promise.
Social Security is a program you can count on, now and in the future.
Even if you don't save for your retirement, government will save for you.
We are with you through life's journey. Social Security, securing today and tomorrow.
But the program doesn't secure tomorrow. The politicians misled us. They didn't save your Social Security payments. They spent every penny the moment they came in. But most people don't know that. What happens to that money?
Well, hopefully it's held in trust.
Actually, they spent it.
So what's there going to be for me?
When politicians began old age programs, they assumed there'd be enough young workers to tax to cover the cost of sending checks to old people, people like me. But people like me are living longer these days, so there aren't enough young people to pay for us. As a result, Social Security is going broke. This year, it went into the red for the first time.
Well, there is a plan out there to save it, but it requires some tough choices.
The Heritage Foundation proposes cutting payments to rich people and raising the retirement age to 70.
There are some common sense tweaks that we can make.
Common sense to you? You're young.
Well, you know what happened is that when Social Security actually was founded, life expectancy was below 65. The purpose of the program was to protect those few lucky ones that outlived everybody else.
So today, the vast majority live past 65. Social Security now has a $32 trillion shortfall. You expecting to collect Social Security from the government?
No, I doubt it.
I suppose it's progress that this was the first time talking to people on the street when most people understood the problem.
It's just a question of how much money we're going to print or borrow. I mean, we're already at $1 trillion a year.
Social Security is kind of like the Titanic, a ship heading for an iceberg.
This is a massive ship that moves very slowly. If we start making reforms now, we can avoid the iceberg. If we wait until we can see the iceberg right in front of our noses and then we try to turn the ship, we're going to run right into it.
Medicare will hit its iceberg in just 8 years. Then benefits will automatically be cut. Social Security will hit it in 15 years. What's to be done? The Democrats say, spend even more.
You don't cut Social Security, you expand it.
Nearly every Democrat in the United States Senate has voted in favor of expanding Social Security.
Human wants and needs are unlimited. There's always another need, another program that needs more funding.
And pay for it by taxing rich people.
That's part of my commitment to raise taxes on the wealthy.
Just tax the rich.
There isn't enough money even that the rich would have to pay for the $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities that we already have on the books.
So were young people worried? Do you ever think about Social Security?
I actually don't. I still feel like I'm too young to know about it.
When you're old, how are you going to support yourself?
I have no idea.
It's a failed system, really, because it's almost like a big Ponzi scheme.
One partial solution proposed by Heritage and others is to let workers put some of their Social Security money into personal retirement accounts.
Just imagine being able to own and control your own retirement dollars. They could invest it in businesses that could grow the economy, whatever rocks your boat.
Private accounts would almost certainly pay you more than Social Security.
Even a conservative portfolio of stocks and bonds that got you about a 5% annual return, you would make many times more.
Private accounts have been tried in a few countries. The investment they created helped Chile rise from one of the poorest countries in Latin America to the richest. And yet, private accounts are still a hard sell. Even in Chile, leftists object to capitalists getting a cut of the pie.
The demonstrators are calling for an end to the management of pensions by private financial institutions.
We lack gratitude for what the free market provides. That is difficult to wrap your head around. It's easy to think, oh, here is the government, this is where I go.
Private accounts are also unpopular in America.
We will never let the Republicans cut or privatize Social Security.
We won't allow cuts to Social Security or Medicare.
What you guys are pushing is the right thing to do, but it's not popular.
It is not popular, but I think people don't fully understand how these programs work.
What happens to that money?
Goes into a pool, I guess.
Do you know they actually don't keep it in the trust fund? They spend it right away?
Didn't know that.
When I get my paycheck, a lot of it goes to taxes, and I see the Social Security part of it, and it's like $30 of my whole paycheck.
You would rather keep that $30 and put it in your own savings account?
Yeah, I would.
The country's in a deficit. There's a point where you can't pay out and go in the negative forever.
She's right. Far better to fix old age programs now rather than have them suddenly go bankrupt later.
Franken says if he was still in the Senate, he'd press Kavanaugh in 2 key areas. I bet he would. Thanks, Ed. Our top story tonight: the president's tweeting will dispel the silly notion we're deliberately misleading. Plus, people are outraged at Starbucks Holiday Cup. We'll have the fiery backlash as the program picks up. Huh. Who's outraged? The world is embittered. No, really, who's outraged? 2 people on Twitter. Look, we want to disprove the president's tweets. Maybe no holiday cups. I see what you mean. So again, our top story: enemy of the people? Trump's ridiculous claims that we view you as sheep. Plus, people are outraged at Starbucks Unity Cup. See, that's not what I meant. And why some are fed up. 72% of people think what we do is misleading. Isn't playing up an outrage just a bit self-defeating? I know that we've honed in on what's good for ratings, but enough with the cops. I understand what you're saying. Deadly protests in Nicaragua with Ortega in charge. What the latest crackdown means for the region at large. Plus, people are outraged at Starbucks' new mug. The not furious backlash specifically from this frightful joke. Again, our top story: a White House deranged? CNN's Jim Acosta in a testy exchange. And so we don't lose your trust, we'll sit silent, alone, and go straight to an eyewitness live on the phone. Well, Jim Acosta asked a question right at the start. It was a very good question, really quite smart. Some here said he had a knack for unmasking imposters. And your name for the record? Jim Acosta. And finally, we leave on a note that is somber. As noun, verb, outrage. The template's in the prompter. Preposition Starbucks. Adjective, noun. Preposition, verb, backlash. Preposition, pronoun.
Restaurant workers are being ripped off, say these protesters, because they aren't guaranteed minimum wage.
In 43 states, employers are allowed to pay tipped workers less, some as little as $2.13 an hour.
That's not a wage. It's barely enough to buy a large cup of coffee.
The celebrities plus union protests convinced voters and politicians in several states that the government must insist on a higher minimum for tipped workers.
This would be more fair for all workers, specifically for minorities and women.
They always say that. It's to help minorities and women.
How's everything today? Good.
But waitress LCLA Felipe is a minority and a woman.
Coffee? Sure.
She says don't change the rules on tips.
We have spaghetti and meatballs.
Thanks to tips, LCLA makes much more than minimum wage.
Free refill, you're good. I'll make $25 an hour. By the end of the year, I made around $48,000 to $50,000. Take this for you. If you raise the minimum wage, it will be harder for restaurants to keep the same amount of employees.
No, say the so-called public interest lawyers. We have to have a law.
The problem with tips is that they're very inconsistent.
Law professor Nicole Hallett leads social justice protests. This one demanding that tipped workers be paid that higher minimum wage.
Require restaurant owners to pay the same hourly wage that all other employers have to pay.
But many restaurant workers say don't raise the minimum. A higher minimum threatens our jobs.
The cost of having a restaurant is not cheap. For my boss to pay all her employees, she will have to cut employees. The boss boy will be cut.
Hallett is unconvinced.
I simply don't believe that increasing the minimum wage for tipped workers will lead in a reduction in the restaurant workforce. Studies have shown that restaurants have been able to bear those costs. Someone has to clear the plates.
But in New York, after the last minimum wage increase, 270 restaurants closed.
Restaurants always close. The industry is doing just fine.
Restaurants don't always close.
Michael Saltzman works for an employer group that fights minimum wage increases.
Yeah, there's turnover in the industry, but what we're doing now is we're taking an industry where there's low profit margins, we're dramatically increasing labor costs, and we're jacking up restaurant closures. If in the Bay Area you've got a 14% increase in restaurant closures for each dollar increase in the minimum wage, something's not right.
That isn't right, but the media is all about workers who are unhappy.
And go home with no money.
I don't think that it's fair for a worker to struggle to pay rent, to struggle to make groceries.
One study found that 46% of tipped workers nationwide rely on public benefits.
Like food stamps. But even Hallett admits many are only eligible because a lot of people don't report tip income.
Many restaurants and restaurant workers often don't report 100% of their income. So the fact that
they're getting benefits doesn't mean anything. It just means that they're cheating the taxpayer. Alcielli says she doesn't cheat, but many other people do.
Lots of people make cash money, tip only. Tons of restaurants do that. Have a great day, hon.
Those who demand higher minimums also claim eliminating tips will reduce sexual harassment. Another argument embraced by the media.
90% of restaurant workers report experiencing sexual behavior that is scary or unwanted. It is
90%.
90%. Tipping is pretty dependent on her willingness to touch or be touched.
This will reduce sexual harassment?
Sexual harassment has nothing to do with the state's tipping system. And it's not me saying that, it's the federal government saying that.
A study using federal data did find that states that raised the minimum actually had increases in sexual harassment. The states that did what you want, there are more charges of sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment is a very complicated problem, and no single policy is going to eliminate that problem.
Okay, so raising the minimum probably won't affect sexual harassment, but it will force some restaurants to fire workers and force some to close. Since prices will be higher, tips will go down. This is supposed to be good for restaurant workers?
Save our jobs!
No wonder so many oppose what the activists demand.
Just keep as it is, we're fine. Who are those people? Have they worked in a restaurant industry?
She hasn't. And all this makes me ask, why should there be any minimum? Why can't the employer and the employee make whatever deal they want?
Well, that policy has been rejected. It's something that has been rejected for the last 100 years, and we're not in that world right now.
We sure aren't. We're in a world where activists and government protect workers even when they don't want that protection.
Do you enjoy sipping drinks through plastic straws? Well, if activists get their way, you won't be allowed to anymore. These must be banned, they say. Why?
500 million plastic straws are used in this country every single day.
And many end up in the ocean, polluting water and killing sea life.
When celebrities speak, politicians listen. Seattle recently banned straws, and other places want to do the same.
Straws suck, and we are no longer going to allow for plastic straws here in San Francisco.
Their time has come and gone.
The idea that you're going to ban straws and save the world is ridiculous.
Angela Logomassini studies environmental issues at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. What will banning plastic straws accomplish?
Probably nothing at all. It might make some people in Hollywood feel good. It might make some politicians feel good, like they're doing something. It might sound good at parties, but it's not going to solve any problems.
Plastic pollution in the ocean is a real problem, but only about 1% of it comes from the United States. Of that 1%, a tiny amount comes from plastic straws. But what about that 500 million number?
In the USA alone, over 500 million straws are being used every single day.
most of which are going into our oceans.
Americans toss out 500 million straws each day.
An incredible 500 million plastic straws.
Where do they all get that number?
Every piece of plastic.
They got it from this child's school project. He says he got the 500 million straws a day figure through a phone survey he conducted with straw manufacturers.
I started a project to reduce the number of straws.
The media just accepts his 500 million number, but the actual number is much lower, according to the analysis firm Technomic. Okay, so activists and media exaggerate the problem.
500 million.
500 million.
500 million.
Still, they promise it would be easy to get rid of the straws.
If we can reduce something that is easy, that is polluting to the environment, that gets stuck in turtles' noses and causes damage to the environment, let's do that.
Progressive talk show host Ethan Behrman.
Sometimes we do need a little gentle guiding hand from government.
Government's gentle guiding hand will either ban straws or order us to replace this cheap plastic straw with ones like these, made of paper or bamboo.
Plastic doesn't actually biodegrade, so unlike a lot of other things, paper, for example, actually breaks down into other components.
That's not a good thing. That means paper straws break down even while you're using them. They get soggy. They leak.
That's the beauty of plastic. It's enduring. Paper straw is going to break down while you're drinking with it.
Paper and bamboo straws aren't environmentally pristine either.
Paper products take more energy and more effort to produce, so you're going to have a net negative environmental impact. If paper doesn't degrade in a landfill either, everything is essentially mummified. You're replacing a superior product with an inferior one, and you're asking people to pay more for it. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. And the higher price is the final result. Paper straws are 8 times more expensive to make than plastic straws. Won't this hurt businesses?
I don't think so. Maybe people won't use straws.
If it's $1.79 to get the fountain drink at Joe's Corner Deli that we're talking about, and now it's $1.83, I don't see that as being a huge difference in the price.
This is what environmentalists say about every policy they put out. A few cents here, a few cents there, eventually it begins to be a burden.
We don't need straws.
You know, a lot of things in life are not necessary, but beneficial and enjoyable. Banning straws isn't going to do anything for the environment. So what they're just trying to do is take away my freedom for nothing in return.
As the environment has become cleaner, that's become a specialty of the environmental movement. Spend your money on feel-good policies that make no real difference.
I will stop sucking.
I will stop sucking.
We will all stop sucking.
1, 2, 3. Turn it up.
This 4th of July, when you watch the fireworks, will you think about this, the Declaration of Independence? We should, after all, the holiday's meant to honor this, not just fireworks. So those are nice. Although it's ironic that since America's founding, government has grown so much that you may not be allowed to buy fireworks where you live. All these places ban them in the name of safety. The Declaration isn't about safety or things government should do. It's about limiting government. It's about freedom. The founders were sick of British oppression. They worried about government having too much power. Thomas Jefferson and his colleagues wrote the Declaration to create a new form of government, one where people could rule themselves. It worked. When the Declaration was signed, America was considered a backwater. But very few years later, America was the most prosperous and probably the freest country in the world. The 4th of July celebrates the Declaration, which led to the Constitution, the document that really lays out the rules meant to limit government. Trust no man with too much power, said Jefferson. Bind them with the chains of the Constitution. Its chains have done a lot of good. We have a right not to have our homes searched without a warrant, a right to bear arms, to free speech. It's good we declared independence from Britain, because in Britain, government sentenced this man to more than a year in jail.
I've caused a breach of peace. I'm being arrested.
For making this Facebook Live video outside a courthouse. Others get locked up for things they write. Hundreds get arrested every year.
sentenced for writing an offending comment.
Fortunately, in America, thanks to the Constitution, we can say most anything we want without being jailed. We also have a right to bear arms. But the country we rebelled against has
some of the strictest gun regulations in the world.
Those regulations haven't stopped crime.
February and March were the first ever months that London had more suspected murders than New York.
So now they're going after people who have knives. One British police agency bragged about a weapons sweep that found scissors and pliers. But don't worry, they've been taken off the streets. I'm glad I live in America where I can carry pliers and speak freely. And there's more to the Constitution than the First and Second Amendments.
Supreme Court overruled.
The Supreme Court overruled.
Supreme Court overruled.
The Constitution divided government power in ways that limit authoritarian politicians from both parties.
We are throwing them the hell out of our country.
Trump's own appointee ruled that a law making it easier to deport some immigrants was too vague.
Allow intelligence agencies to track who a terrorist is in contact with.
The Supreme Court stopped the Obama administration 100 times. No, President Obama, the Fourth Amendment says government cannot just search people's cell phones.
They have to get a search warrant.
No, you can't just declare carbon dioxide to be a pollutant.
A major setback tonight for President Obama's climate change initiative.
I'm glad we have this document. It has often kept presidents and Congress and judges from grabbing too much power. The limits stated in here have not fully succeeded, unfortunately. Thomas Jefferson promised a wise and frugal government. Frugal? Give me a break. We're already more than $21 trillion in debt. Jefferson also wrote about leaving men free to regulate their own pursuits. Now we've got more than 180,000 pages of rules. Still, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have helped keep us free. That's something to celebrate. These young people say Jordan Peterson should not be allowed to speak on their campus. Peterson's a psychology professor at the University of Toronto. When Canada proposed a law declaring it illegal not to call someone by their preferred pronoun, in other words, illegal not to address those who don't want to be called he or she, as say Z or Zim, Peterson said he would not obey that law.
Shame on you! Shame, shame, shame on you!
It's not just students who object. Hundreds of his colleagues signed a petition demanding that Peterson be fired. They say his behavior is a danger.
This is where we draw the line! This is where we draw the line!
Now, when he tries to speak, protesters often surround him, blowing air horns or screaming to make sure others cannot hear him. At this school, he and students who wanted to hear him moved outside to escape the noise. But the protesters just followed him and drowned him out again.
Go home, Peterson! Go home, Peterson!
Somebody wants to be called Z or Zer. Why not?
I don't care what people want to be called, that's fine, but that doesn't mean I should be compelled by law to call them that. The government has absolutely no business whatsoever, ever, governing the content of your voluntary speech.
But if I personally said, I'd like you to call me Z or Zen.
We could have a conversation about that, just like I would if you asked me to use a nickname, for example. But there's a big difference between privately negotiated modes of address and legislatively demanded, compelled speech.
Protesters call Peterson all sorts of names.
They've called me lots of things. Hitler, that was one. The fact that it has to do with transgender people is virtually irrelevant. The issue is compelled speech.
Peterson handles the protesters well. And you look pretty calm while they're screaming at you.
Yeah, well, better to be calm.
Best to let the unreasonable opposition speak, because they manifest themselves as unreasonable, and then everyone can see it.
You can also see it in this video, viewed millions of times. Maybe because Peterson stays calm Well, the TV host keeps twisting his words.
You're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
He simply says that natural differences explain most of the gender wage gap.
Do you believe in equal pay?
Well, I made the argument there. It's like it depends on
So
who
you don't
defines
believe
it.
in equal pay?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Like many on the left, she insists that difference proves discrimination. If it weren't for our sexist society, we'd be much more alike.
That's actually not the case. The science on that is absolutely clear. They've studied tens of thousands of people in dozens of countries, and the papers have been cited thousands of times.
For years, many leftists denied there were any differences.
Aren't women in general better nurturers?
No. Next question.
Feminist icon Gloria Steinem even objected to researching differences.
It's really the remnant of anti-American crazy thinking to do this kind of research.
But more research has been done, and it shows that on average, men and women excel at different things.
That runs contrary to the desires of the researchers who generated the data, because no one wanted that. It came as a shock to everyone, but that's how it is.
And yet when you say this, it infuriates some people.
No, it should infuriate them, because I'm going right after the heart of the radical leftist doctrine.
The heart of that doctrine is that all groups should have equal outcomes. There should be just as many female CEOs, scientists, computer programmers, because men and women are the same. If outcomes differ, it must be sexism. Or, as actress Ashley Judd puts it,
The problem is the patriarchy.
The patriarchy. Professors teach exactly that.
The United States is a patriarchal society.
First of all, I think the idea that men tyrannically dominated everything is a pretty damn weak argument. The year 2000 to the year 2012, the rate of absolute poverty in the world fell by 50%. It's like, that's pretty good for a patriarchal tyranny. That was the fastest economic development in the history of the world.
But on campus, the message is inequality, oppression. Students major now in social justice.
Disciplines like women's and ethnic studies, which are corrupt right to the core.
I pledge to use they and them when I do not know someone's pronouns.
They're out to produce radical leftist activists by their own admission. All you have to do is go to the websites of these disciplines and look at how they advertise.
Social justice is different from justice. Social justice generally means justice for groups of people. It assumes every group, men, women, blacks, whites, should have the same income, job preference, everything. Peterson says this is an idea that comes from Marxist professors. It's a little discredited now to say I'm a Marxist.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Except I think it's 1 in 5 social scientists identify as Marxists. So yeah, it's a little discredited, but it's nowhere near discredited enough. It should be as discreditable to say that you're a Marxist as it is to say that you're a Nazi.
It isn't. On campus, socialism is cherished, says Peterson, although it's murderous.
We've got 100 million corpses stacked up to demonstrate.
Murderous then, but they say Stalin is a bad individual. Doesn't mean that.
Yeah, so was Mao, so was Pol Pot. The thing is it was tried everywhere, and the end consequence was always the same. I've heard this all many, many times. That wasn't real communism. You know what that means? That means that if I would have been the benevolent dictator in the place of Stalin, then I would have brought in the utopia. There isn't a more narcissistic and toxic and inexcusable statement that you can possibly make.
We actually value the individual.
Peterson offers an alternative in videos that suddenly are being viewed by millions.
The individual has intrinsic value.
Peterson calls for the opposite of Marxism, individual sovereignty.
The free market principles, the idea of individual sovereignty above all else, has distributed itself across the world quite effectively, and everyone is doing better here than anybody has ever done on the face of the planet throughout recorded history, and the whole West is like that. And to call that all a tyrannical patriarchy is indicative of a very deep resentment and a historical ignorance that's so profound that it's indistinguishable from willful blindness.
Peterson says the best thing people can do to fight back against that blindness is to speak the truth, even when it's unpopular. Peterson follows his own advice. He says unpopular truths, and people like that. Almost 1 million have bought his book.
In
in the clink, in the slammer, yeah, I'm doing hard time for a crime that I committed back in 2009. See, violent games lead to crime. Wish I knew from the start. Before I ever got involved in playing Mario Kart, I was hugging the turns, heaving items for thrills. Ain't seen a toe so damaged by shell since that last oil spill. But something happens to your brain doing virtual wrongs. Woke up the next morning and it wasn't too long, for I was dropping bananas upon every street, hurling turtles, hurting every single person I see. Then I was road raging at plumbers, nobody could stop me. I'd run princesses off the road so much I joined the paparazzi. Now I'm in prison doing 20 to life. How could such a game be legal, man? The danger is rife. Where my fate is sealed, won't be doing right, because I'm playing violent video games tonight. And the things I do, I've been doing like it's a tragedy, I'm gonna be in jail for life. Reminds me of another time my life went astray, playing a World War II game back in 2008. I was only playing a minute, then I felt an unease. Next thing I did right after playing, I interred the Japanese. Years later I would pay the judges to win every race. It's just what happens when you play too many games by EA. Now I'm doing life with no chance of parole. Why didn't anybody ban these games? I was out of know. When my fate is sealed, won't be doing right, because I'm playing violent video games tonight. And the things I do, I've been doing like it's a tragedy, I'm gonna be in jail for life. Expert here, and forgive me for stalling, but violent video games, the stats are appalling. Just look at this graph, and as you can tell, as gameplay's increased, youth crime has as well. It's gone down? Well, who needs a chart? I took 400 grand in loans, so you know that I'm smart. Like a guy leaving the moil, you're missing the point. Freedom's when you only get to play the games we annoy. When my fate is sealed, won't be doing right, because I'm playing violent video games tonight. And the things I do, I've been doing like it's a tragedy, I'm gonna be in jail for life. When my fate is sealed, won't be doing right, because